Welcome back. This week is an exciting week because we have our very first biostatistician on the show. Dr. Richard Webster joined us. He is a biostatistician/methodologist for the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario Research Institute. Dr. Webster gives us more insight into the differences between biostats, data science, and machine learning, what a methodologist is and how he became one after doing his PhD in biology, things that graduate and postdoc students should think about to set themselves up for success after school, and lastly, we chat what working as a methodologist at a hospital looks like and what type of research he's been working on. Enjoy. Welcome, Dr. Richard Webster. You are a researcher and methodologist at CHEO, and you're the first biostatistician on our show. So basically anything you say is just novel territory. So it'll be very good for everyone listening to have a completely different perspective from everything else we've talked about.
That's great. I'm really excited to begin this conversation.
So first, I guess, can we just start, what is biostats? How does it differ from data science and everything else in the big data world?
So I suppose this is so interesting because it's changed so much in the last 5 to 10 years. And it's an important thing to understand because there's so much hype around some of these terms. So you have statistics, biostatistics, data science, machine learning, big data. There are all these like concepts that are thrown around a lot. And I suppose it's good to sort of to understand what they are. But in the end of the day, they're all kind of doing the same thing, I think. So statistics and biostatistics is your sort of inferential testing, and you're trying to do hypothesis testing for the most part. Whereas, I mean, there might be some exploration in there as well. And data science is maybe this broader hat, where statistics can be like one pillar within data science. It might also include, there might be a bit more of a bent to computational stuff. I mean, big data is very much part of data science, and big data is where your sort of normal computer will start to maybe, or Excel might start to struggle with the size of the data files. So a big data set is a data set that's defined by the sort of computational hardware that you've got accessible. And machine learning, this is the sort of, I'm not going to say the new kid on the block because it's been around for a long time, but it's people that get very excited about this. Executives at hospitals are getting very excited about it for operational research and saving money and improving clinical outcomes. And it's maybe compared to, it's more focused on predictive analytics, I would say. Whereas statistics can be, it could be predictive analytics or it could be hypothesis testing. And they're very different things because most of us, when we're going through our like graduate school program, a lot of us will be focused on hypothesis testing and sort of exploring the nature of the world. That's a very sort of scientific thing, academic thing to do. And you'll focus on, because you're doing this inferential statistics and hypothesis testing, you'll be focusing on variables in the model. So there might be many variables in the model, and one of them you're really interested in. You want to test, does that contribute to the way the system works? And you'll look at the p-value. Whereas over in machine learning, you might not care about the p-value. In fact, it would be wrong to interpret the p-value because of certain procedures, like the way you manipulate and play the data before you put it into the algorithm makes that p-value kind of meaningless. And all you care about is like, how accurate can I predict something? How certain am I that something is going to happen or not?
So do you only find out if you're right once it happens then? I guess you're just waiting to see if your results match up?
Great question. So this again is the reason why I think people make a bit too big a deal of machine learning and think it's something totally different from statistics is because, like, as a sort of biostatistician, I do a lot of logistic regression. Everyone does a lot of logistic regression. It's amazing. But so do people doing machine learning. But machine learning, they kind of add things before and after the logistic regression to make it a machine learning model. And so what they do is they'll take this maybe a bigger data set than what maybe some people are used to dealing with, and they'll break it up into a training data set and a test data set, a holdout set, and maybe a validation set. And that's something that statisticians maybe and sort of clinical research, generally we don't do that. But it can be really powerful because it allows us to build a predictive model on on a portion of the data, and then refine that predictive model with a validation training set, and then test it on this data that we've kept separate in a different bucket, and we can then say, oh, this is how accurate it is on new data, on data that wasn't used to build the model. So that sort of, you're still using the logistic regression, but the workflow that it fits into is a bit more complicated. There's like this cross-validation to like help tune the model, and then afterwards you're training it and not reporting a p-value, but you're reporting the ROC or the how good this thing is, some forms of accuracy metrics.
Yeah, so you're mainly a biostatistician then. So how did you kind of choose that as your field? How did you get into that specifically?
So I suppose I got into it by accident. I did my PhD in biology, and my supervisor was the sort of guy in the biology department that was the go-to stats guy. And you sort of, when you're around someone like that, you realize how valuable that person is, because they can help everyone. And if you combine like a really good knowledge of stats with a desire to help people, you're going to be kept busy for the rest of your life. So that's sort of how I got into it, and it's enjoyable helping people with their problem, and I mean, not just when you start to understand statistics, you're able to better frame your research question, and that as a person who's now doing much more sort of epidemiology and clinical research, I'm based in a hospital at CHEO, and a huge part of my job is the trying to develop some sort of telepathy. That seems to be the biggest part of my job, where I'm trying to read the mind of people that come to me, and they say, should I do this test or should I do that test? And you have to like backpedal a bit and say, whoa. What question are we asking in the first place? Let's get that question right. What's the audience you're trying to talk to? What's the clinical outcome of this research that you want? And once you understand that, you can like start taking a few steps backwards and sort of reverse engineer the actual research question from what people are interested in.
Okay, so I have two quick follow-up questions on that. First, I mean, because you did your master's in more like engineering, computer science. So did you specifically choose then your supervisor because he was the stats guy? Or was it your interest in biology that then like it just happened as a byproduct? Like, did you have that natural?
It was a byproduct. I mean, I think out of my sort of like undergraduate and my master's, I realized that it's really important to be good at this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that projects can get lost if you don't understand. The scope of projects can just balloon if you don't define that question well to begin with. So I really valued it, and when I realized that my supervisor was Tom Sharrett was like really good at statistics, I sort of he encouraged me and helped me develop, and then I from there I went on to get I went from an ecology lab, and the reason why ecologists have to be very good at statistics is because the data is often small data sets and high signal to noise. So you can't just look at the raw data and it will tell you something. You often have to, just like epidemiology, you have a lot of confounders and you have a lot of noise that you're trying to statistically pass out to find to understand the phenomenon.
And then going from, but like, I'm just asking this question just for, say, the students who are trying to figure out what they want to do or how they navigate things. You went from a PhD that was more biology based and like ecology based, and then ended up at the hospital doing more healthcare research. Like, was that a shift in your interests, or was that kind of following the numbers and like, as long as you're playing with numbers, you like it?
Yeah, it's so I think when I started my PhD, I was like, I thought because you're surrounded by people in that field and you're in an academic environment, I thought, oh, it'd be really nice to be a professor doing this kind of more of this kind of stuff. And I had a few papers. I graduated from my PhD. I stayed in the lab for another bit, getting a few more papers, wrapping up a few projects, and then sort of the you have to take the opportunities that are in front of you. I think it's really important for trainees to understand that sometimes their PhD supervisors, it's not that they give bad career advice maliciously, but I think they it is naive for you to think that they can give representative career advice, because people that have ended up professors at universities, they are there's some survival bias to those people. They have been excellent have done excellent in their job and have been able to end up to be top of their field doing this kind of stuff. But you have to remember that of the people that get a PhD, less than 0.5% of them go on to be professors.
Wow, I did not know that was the stat.
Yeah. So once you sort of realize this, you have to, and I could share you a sort of a Sankey diagram that sort of, or a stream diagram that shows where all these. I think it was published in Nature of Science, and it sort of shows where people end up who sort of fall out of their PhD.
Yeah.
And I saw this graph, and basically you fall out of your PhD, and 50% of the people go and get careers out of science. And they've obviously been burnt by their PhD, and they're like, I can't get out of here fast enough. And that's sad, because it's like wasted potential. These people love science, and maybe they had bad mentorship, or they couldn't make their link to make a career out of it, which is and so what happens to the other 50% that sort of stay in science? Well, some of them stay in science for like a postdoc, a couple of postdocs, early career, and then maybe another 25% of those will leave science, and then basically 20% of them will get non-university research jobs in industry or government. So that's a big chunk of people. And then about 3-4% will get permanent research staff positions, of which that subset of like 0.5% will end up being professors. So some of that, like 4%, is maybe a lab technician in a university, or all the other sorts of. So you have to remember as a trainee that you should look around you, and if you think you're in the top like 0.5% of people that are doing in all graduate programs, maybe you can go on and get a professorship. And even then, you're going to have to be quite pretty lucky, because there's some amazingly talented people out there. And career is there's some supply and demand, because so many people want to be professors. So many people are getting graduate degrees. So basically, I decided that I should develop some of my skills in biostats, and see if I love science, I love numbers, see if I can get into that 20% of people that have a PhD that go on to industry or government, and do really great things there, like applied science and other things. There is there is a multitude of jobs that people don't even know exist. I didn't even know what a methodologist was when I graduated my PhD. I thought it was a type of religious cult. So yeah, there's so much exciting things out there. So I got my PhD. I postdoced for a bit in my PhD lab. Then I took a fellowship in a government lab where I did some like big data stuff. We were using shell scripts to create sort of pipelines to process whole genome data to look at if do the children of fathers who smoke, do they have more mutations? So traditionally you think of all the pressures that society puts on pregnant women. You can't smoke, you can't drink, you can't do drugs. Life's going to become pretty boring. But guys can just go out and do whatever they want all the time. So we know from animal studies that if you expose mice to like huge amounts of radiation, the males their stem cells will get damaged, and they'll generate sperm that has a high mutational load. So that offspring of males exposed to radiation, male mice exposed to smoke, secondhand smoke, their offspring will have more mutations. So that's very hard to test in humans because we can't randomly assign people to radiation or smoking
every day, and let's see what happens.
Yeah, the ethics would not like that. We even had problems with the ethics board because one of the old men on the committee thought we were sort of ganging up on men. White smoking men, the underserved group, obviously, have it too hard.
Story, more pressure on men.
So we set up that project, and a big part of it was it's really expensive to do. And I think this is where I found myself. I wanted to do things that help make important decisions better. And statistics can help you do that. So we had to take a whole genome sample of a person, costs over $1,000. Like, how are you gonna spend that money when each sample is so expensive? So I was able to use power calculations to suggest we need to go out and get this much data, and if we get lots of big families instead of individuals from many different families, we can have higher statistical power because we're controlling for between individual differences through using a random effects model. So that was, and then you can also start doing things like, well, you can say, well, if that's the power we need, let's compare and contrast financial decision making. If we go out and buy this new machine, which costs $1 million and helps reduce the cost of any individual sample, how long will it take for us to make our money back on that machine? So that was, I really started to enjoy this, realizing that science can help make better decisions as well as better science. And it just happened that this whole project had like a bit of a spin on child health, and that's how I ended up sort of transitioning from a fellowship in a government lab to being a sort of PhD level biostatistician methodologist in a clinical consulting unit, a research consulting unit in a hospital. And I didn't even know those places existed. Like,
I love hearing those stories where someone starts in like one subject and completely whirlwinds their way into something different. Like, say you started in bio and now you're in like children's health and biostats, because I feel a little less stress in every decision that I make. I'm like, okay, like tomorrow's decision isn't affecting my entire life. Like, I can still play around with different things and things will still maneuver around, but it can still lead to that success. So I just want to say that I really liked hearing that. But now that you're at CHEO, so what kind of stuff are you doing at CHEO?
So there is the CHEO hospital, and then affiliated with that is the CHEO Research Institute. And basically, the CHEO Research Institute has almost a good portion of the physicians at the hospital. It's an academic tertiary care hospital, so they do research, but they vary in how much research they do. Some people will publish a paper every few years. Some people will publish 10 papers every year. But there's very few that are like as a smaller proportion, that like the 5 or 10% that have 25-50% of their time dedicated to research. So a huge amount of those physicians are trying to do one or so papers a year, and they have really great clinical questions, but they need assistance with refining their research question. You want to get those early design decisions right before you spend time and money collecting data. So basically, there's at the CHEO Research Institute, I'm in the clinical research unit, which is a consultancy shop that basically offers methodological and biostats help to everyone in the hospital, and we also help people from outside as well. So we act a bit like the TOH's, the Oral Hospital's Method Center, where people from all over Ottawa, all over the world will come to us and say, "Oh, we need this help designing this. Can you help us design this experiment, design this clinical trial, do quality assurance for the clinical trial, all sorts of things."
That's really cool. I didn't even know that there was like such a big center of just that. I thought everyone kind of takes it on their own, and
because the problem is, if you before the clinical research unit, the CRU existed, if you leave people to sort of fend for themselves, they're gonna try and MacGyver it, find a cheap option, and it's going to be very wasteful of everyone's time. And physicians' time is expensive, and they have good ideas. So basically, the hospital kicks in some money to support having a group of experts to help sort of act as an incubator to sort of like help develop the younger clinicians that are interested in research, and then help them apply for grants, improve grant success rate, hopefully, improve publications, take it from a mediocre publication to a really good publication. It's really valuable. It saves everyone's time. And then you can also include things that, because we have the clinical research unit has a staff of maybe 16 people, maybe 3 or 4 PhDs, and a bunch of people with other graduate degrees, qualitative and quantitative people. We can provide the service much better than maybe an individual research coordinator that is doing this for the first time. We'll hopefully have seen the problem before. We are an R shop, so we just use the R programming language, and we generate reproducible reports, like automated documents that we can hand to the client. If they come back to us in 3 years, we can hand them the same document again. If they change the data, if suddenly at the end of 3 years, like an extra 50 people get added to the data set, we can, at a click of a button, the whole statistical pipeline will stay the same, and the results will just update magically. And that sort of stuff is really important in science. This whole reproducibility crisis, having trust in the results, and then sharing how you cleaned your results, and just like super simple things like knowing how many people you have in your study. That's a pretty simple question, but like when you're doing your graduate degree or your postdoc, you have 1 or 2 or 3 projects that you know every detail about it. But when you get into the real world, you're going to have like 10 projects, and then it's harder to keep track. And so we can use these really good open source, reproducible research, open science tools to try and be really efficient in making better science.
Okay, so I have a couple of follow-up questions on that. My first one is a two-part question. So you do a lot of help for the physicians that want to do the research but need methodological help. Are you able to do you have a desire? Are you still able to do your own research? And if yes, like, do you prefer staying to the stats and just helping people with theirs versus doing your own project? If that made sense.
This is the sort of challenge that I think that people have leaving the academic environment, because you're taught to have like your own passion project and like work on that, and that is academic, and that is that's the way that it's done. In the real world, my salary is coming from the hospital, so I have the help. I am a collaborator. Everyone that I work with, they don't see me as a sort of underling that goes away and does their stuff, but like, I'm a collaborator and I'm providing a service, and we try and provide a really excellent service. And it sort of varies from place to place. So I think the CIU, because we provide, the hospital provides us a large portion of our revenue. We are really work to get a really good sort of
like rapport
and like develop relationships with the clinicians, help them not just on one project, but help them develop research programs. That's like the incubator mentality. So we'll help them with a few projects, and then we'll help them write the grant that those few pilot projects will like feed into, and then they'll go away and get money, and then they'll bring money into our center. So I've been at CHEO now for almost 3 years, and I've won a few grants, and when I've done sort of grants off the side of my desk and I win money and bring it into the hospital gives me some research relief. And that's exactly what physicians do as well. A lot of them have maybe 10% research relief when they join the job, when they join the hospital. But then as they get more and more grant money coming in, they'll get just like you get teaching relief when you're in a university, and you teach less courses, the more money you bring in, you can do less clinical work, or I can do less collaborative service work. I can focus on my own projects.
Interesting. So do you have any before I ask that, so you mentioned you guys work with R. I know at, say, in the MSc Epi program, like it's heavy on SAS, and then I've heard in the government there's Stata. Like, is there a preference for any of these three, or people who are going into that? Is it dependent on where you want to go, which program you should learn, or should you just try them all? Or
it's difficult, isn't it? The world's a complicated place.
Even biostats class now, they sort of say for the labs, like, okay, mainly we do SAS. You can also choose if you want to use R or Stata. And everyone had this panic during the first couple of weeks of like, which one's going to be the best for my career? What should I use? What should I do?
Yeah, I mean, so what the choices are, the hardcore choices are SAS, R, Python, Stata maybe. So what are the pros and cons? So Stata and SAS, you got to pay money. So if you want to go into a non-for-profit, you're not getting them. No way. Like, you can't afford it. If you want cutting edge statistical tools, my preferences are, because all the academics, all the statisticians and the epidemiologists, they're developing the packages. There's a grassroots movement where there's now, I think, over 12 or 15,000 packages that have been developed in R by the experts, and SAS can't keep up with that. Like,
No.
they're trying to make money. Let's be honest. Like, they're not going to go. So for the open source options are in Python. I would. I haven't done much Python. I think Python has some great uses. I think it's a more flexible programming language. I don't really care about having a flexible programming language. I just want to do data analysis really well and fast. And that's why I chose R. And R has some really great reproducible research features in it.
I'm surprised that R is not. I mean, I'm totally just speaking even just from our program. I'm surprised that there's not more emphasis on R then, because so far it sounds like everything has kind of been more of a pro to R versus
I mean, and it's my bias as well. I mean, like people like ICS, the Institute of Clinical Evaluative Sciences. That's the Ontario level health record, OHIP records. That is purely SAS. A lot of government departments purely SAS.
Okay.
But it depends. Big organizations are slow to change.
Yeah.
But they will change. I think Python compared to R, Python has some really good machine learning tools. R has them, but maybe not as deep. It'll catch up, I'm sure. I think you have to have R or Python in your. I also think that I think in university, in a graduate program, you should be developing. You shouldn't just be interested in science in your particular project. You should be interested in open science and reproducibility and like these concepts that are like so big. And if it's disappointing that I think universities, because it's the stats department definitely isn't teaching in SAS. Like, no way. So I'm surprised, but then I'm not.
It could also just be because, say, like our profs learned in SAS, so they're most comfortable, so that's why it continues.
Yeah, I mean, I bet you if you went to like, if you did a survey of like, because it doesn't matter what the courses are done in. It maybe matters what your thesis supervisor is trained in and what they want you to do it in. But I bet the younger people are used. Yeah, and the younger people, and also the people with a more of a bent like to statistics. The people in the EPI program that are known to be biostatisticians and have that interest.
Yeah,
I would bet they're using R and Python.
Okay, that was a good sidetrack question. Thanks. But back to your CHEO work, I also wanted to touch on, you do work in like sustainability, and can you touch on that as well?
We have all kinds of. The great thing about my job is the sort of work I do with other people as a collaborator. It's all over the board. Any kind of clinical research. It's we've had a ton of COVID projects. We're monitoring the amount of kids across Canada that are inpatients in hospitals and reporting that to PFAC, Public Health Agency of Canada. We're testing the sensitivity and specificity of COVID tests for kids, and the nasal test, which is kind of painful, versus the saliva test, which is not painful and cheap, and you can pool samples, so you can look at it over the whole time course of the disease. We've done work on PPE sanitization, sterilization. So can you use UV or bleach, or don't drink bleach, or heat to clean masks, and then do they still work? So all sorts of, and then we do systematic reviews and clinical trials and chart reviews, observational data. big data projects to do with ICES on like the CHEO now has its own data warehouse, which is a really great new resource. So there's new pilot projects coming back where we have amazing data going back for the last sort of 10-ish years of really high quality data. There's just anything and everything, which makes every day interesting and stressful.
Yeah, but it's probably almost more fun, I'd say, in your position that you get a hand in all these different projects and you get to collaborate on so many different topics, and rather than, say, compared to the physician who might just like only have their one niche. And I mean, I'm sure they enjoy that niche, that's why they chose it, but personally I think it's really cool that you get to sort of touch on all these different
and the cool thing about it is you learn about I had to learn new methods and techniques, but I also learned about all these like random parts of biology and medicine, which is, I mean, that's what everyone loves, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see what you guys find out. I think that how you mentioned you guys are looking even at the PPE and COVID stuff. I mean, so timely.
That was a really successful project. One of the physicians and I, we'd worked together before, and basically the week that we all got sent home for lockdown, we had a meeting and we were like, we don't know whether, we know Italy ran out of masks and ran out of tons of PPE. We don't know whether our hospital is going to run out. If we get close to running out, we're going to reuse stuff. How is it safe to reuse stuff? And we were concerned that people would make that decision with poor evidence. So what we did was we did a series of rapid systematic reviews where we had like maybe a dozen people on this project, like experts, like PhD level experts, going through librarian scientists, biostatisticians, clinicians, like amazing research coordinators, and together in this big sort of like team project. Normally a systematic review would take 6 months, like a year to publish. And we were able to basically publish it in a month.
Wow.
And in the course of like 2 months, we were able to publish like 4 systematic reviews on this topic, super timely, provide it to the government of Canada to help them inform their decision making. So it was, we were doing it for us to inform CHEO, but then share it in this sort of like collaborative open science way.
And quickly, like what did you find in terms of whether you could reuse it, how the best way was?
Yeah, so it was, so there was these maybe 3 main ways to sterilize masks. There's heat, there's UV, and there's chemicals, and they all work really, really well from the data that's out there. And heat can be a bit problematic if the mask has plastic bits on, because sometimes the plastic melts. So the heat depends on the type of mask. Sometimes it works for some masks, but not others. But we were able to make recommendations to people about UV. So we were able to say, you need this dose of UV energy to clean the lights, and ideally it needs to be in this range. This is the ideal wavelength to like break up viruses and hopefully break up COVID-19.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
it was really interesting.
And I'm taking up a lot of your time here. Sorry. I just want one more question. I just want you to chat about there's the Sustainability Journal Club in Ottawa. If you could chat about that quick.
Yeah. So I suppose I have some of my own dedicated research time, and part of that is I do a bit of work on statistical power analysis, because that's really important for decision making, and the other part is on healthcare sustainability. So this is really important over my career, over the next like 20-30 years. Healthcare is going to change a lot, and they don't know it yet. We like the NHS has said that they have a 15-year plan to be net zero, and that's just been released, and that is not just what the hospital does. It's not not the hospital's electricity, but it's downstream and upstream processes as well. It's how the drugs get to the hospital, what the drugs are made out of. It's transport to the hospital, flying people into the hospital. It's everything. So the NHS has this really ambitious target. They think they can do it in 15 years, and it's just a matter of time for that to sort of that philosophy will trickle down to Canadian healthcare. Canadian healthcare contributes to 4.5% of the nation's greenhouse gases. So it's a substantial portion. If we can halve that, or like, that would be huge.
Yeah.
Everyone has to do their bit. So I'm working with a series of people for my sort of like my own research. We've got an Ottawa greening healthcare journal club that people are welcome to attend. I'll give you the link. And then there's also an organization called Emerging Leaders in Environmental Sustainability in Healthcare, ELISH, ELESH, and they're a group of like young physicians, epidemiologists, biostatisticians that are sort of, I mean, they're gonna be the people that are making this change in the next 20, 30 years.
Yeah, if you could send me the link to those, and with the graph that you were talking about earlier about the PhD trajectory, I'll throw those in the show notes because I feel like people would love to see that, and for the journal club to just get more info on it. And I like how that was a very almost nice, wholesome, full circle moment of you're kind of back into the environment biology.
Yeah, things. I mean, isn't it great? Like, you can, like, it's funny how, like, yeah,
everything came back.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, well, that was really awesome. And I mean, I even learned a lot, and I like to think that I know somewhat of things already just because I already knew you prior to this, but I was still learning everything that I thought I had somewhat of a grasp on. So I really appreciate that.
No, this has been really fun.
Thank you very much for coming on. And I think, it'll be really helpful for everyone on our side who all we've heard is the clinician perspective, and biostats is so foreign to a lot of people in the program.
Yeah, and people have to just, like, you have to own it. Like, it can be tough, but it's even tougher if you don't try.
Yeah. And I think personally, my biggest takeaway was almost that moment of R versus SAS. I thought I was missing something on why there was so much emphasis on SAS in my program. So it calms me a little that my preference for R is still a good preference to have.
It's not going to hurt you. Like, it's going to be a good thing for you to have. Like, and you can just do so many powerful things with it. SAS is like 10 years behind, in my opinion, at the moment, and it's never going to catch up because there's so many. Because you don't care, like, it's always like solving the niche problem that you're interested in, and it's constantly changing. But you need that, like, advanced new cool thing to do, and if you can 90% of the time get it in R and rarely get it in SAS, like, that just, it's also the graphs. The graphs are beautiful in R.
I agree.
Like, and SAS graphs are just crap.
Yep. No, honestly, everything about R just makes more sense. It's more visually pleasing. Just even using it makes more sense to me. I was trying to figure out SAS, and I mean, again, everyone says it's better to have more tools in your toolbox, but gosh, it just frustrates me.
Also, the data cleaning. Data cleaning is so much easier in R because with the whole tidyverse thing, like, and dplyr, like, that is beautiful, simple, elegant code. Like, and that's changed even since you were learning it, I think. Like, when you were working with Nigel, like, and taking Tom's course, like, it's changed a lot since then. Like, and you can still do the things that you were taught, but there's just this whole other sort of, like, sub-language or a philosophy and the piping, and it just makes it all so clean
and better. Yeah,
it's great.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for spending all this time chatting with me, and I'm sorry
No,
for
this has
taking
been fun.
over. I think I need to start making the times like 45 minutes because I have a trend of just getting too invested in the topic.
Well, that's good.
But I'm sure the people will enjoy it too. So thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Okay, I wish you the best.
Thanks so much
Oh,
for coming on and doing this.
no worries. Thanks so much for inviting me. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in. That was such a great episode and from an entirely new perspective than we've had thus far. I hope you picked up something new about the world of biostats and the potential career prospects. I also hope that if you got one main takeaway from this episode, it's the importance of learning biostatistics. I cannot say enough about how helpful and beneficial of a tool it is to have in your toolbox. As always, please rate, review, and follow us. Help us spread these awesome interviews with leaders in the healthcare field to the rest of the community. And lastly, follow us at Behind the Numbers with no E in numbers on Instagram and Twitter. Now have a great week and see you next Monday.